Hey guys, it's Kat, and I have made the decision to re-upload this video to my YouTube channel because I think it's become even more relevant since I first posted it back in 2019. And when I first posted it, it got really attacked. And on top of all of that, it's the first video of mine that has ever been forcibly privated by YouTube. If you guys follow me regularly on here, you may have seen a couple of weeks ago that I thought that I'd finally gotten the video back because I realized that I was able to send in an appeal and I could probably get the video posted back. And at first they approved the appeal. But when the video was approved, it was very quickly taken down. There's going to be some stuff in this video that is blurred, and it's blurred because I needed to blur it, right? It's not stuff that I wanted to blur. It is stuff that I needed to blur in order to get the video up. So with that all being said, I'm going to show you guys this video now. It is, I think, one of the very first video essays I ever made. So with that in mind, it's a bit rough around the edges and it's definitely of its time. But I want for you guys to keep in mind a lot of the stuff that I said in this video because it definitely was stuff I wish people listened to back when this happened. So I wanted this video to be up because I was really frustrated that it got taken down. So here it is.
A gunman with an automatic weapon has opened fire on a mosque in central Christchurch.
This can now only be described as a terrorist attack.
In the most extraordinary fashion, he live streamed what we believe was his attack in the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch. It seems it was filmed with some sort of GoPro head-mounted or body-mounted camera. The footage showed him firing indiscriminately at men, women and children from close range.
He changed magazines 7 times.
On March 15th, after ending his Facebook live stream, a gunman opened fire on 2 different mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand.
The total number of people who have died in this horrendous event are 49.
Ultimately killing more than 50 people, making this attack the deadliest in New Zealand's recent history. He wrote a 74-page manifesto in which he describes why he's doing what he's doing. And in that manifesto, a few things become clear. He's a white nationalist who believed that Australia and New Zealand should remain white, who saw the immigration of Muslims as a threat. He believed in white genocide, which argues that through race mixing and immigration, white people will eventually become extinct. And he makes several references to YouTubers, right-wing speakers, and other voices that are popular in social media. Before he embarked on his killing spree, he said,
"Remember, lads, subscribe to PewDiePie."
While I don't personally believe that PewDiePie is responsible for this terrorist incident, and many of the things said in the manifesto can be boiled down to shitposting, the incident got me thinking about how white supremacy has been rebranded in an age of social media, and it reminded me of a conversation that I had at YouTube HQ. I'm 28 years old and I've been a YouTuber since I was 15 years old. I started making videos in my bedroom where I'd come to speak about how frustrating my day was.
I'm tired of continuously trying to maintain.
I called it a vlog, but I was later told that most people referred to it as a vlog. YouTube was a home for me, a place for me to freely express myself in ways that I didn't totally feel comfortable in real life. I documented my pursuit of education and then later my transition that started after I was accepted to the college of my dreams. I cultivated a small yet dedicated following, but I never really wanted to be a YouTuber.
I don't feel like dealing with the bullshit that goes on in the comments. I get enough of it privately. I don't feel like dealing with it publicly.
I wouldn't say I really became one until after Trayvon Martin was killed, and the reaction to his death revealed to me that some of the people I considered friends didn't truly have a positive view of Black people as a whole, but saw me as one of the good ones. So this inspired me to shift my content from discussions of my personal life to my newfound passion for social justice. I wanted to express how I felt about what was happening in the world, while also educating people where I could. This content became popular because at the time I was one of very few people creating content like it. And of course in that process, I was introduced to another side of YouTube, a side of the web where people, instead of challenging racism, frequently made excuses for it. And this is where I discovered that there is actually quite a prevalent presence of content that was at least sympathetic to white supremacy and at most actually advocating for white nationalism. I've seen YouTube change in the over decade that I've been here. It used to be where we'd post cat videos, but today we've seen the rise of influencer culture, and for some, posting videos online is their career. While some of these people make a living telling jokes or unboxing the newest gadgets, others make money propagating hate. Upon discovering this, I dismissed it. White supremacy is obviously a bad idea that wouldn't hold up. But when I looked into these channels, I saw that some of them were quite popular, and many of them were able to make hundreds of thousands of dollars through crowdfunding sites like Patreon. I wondered why that was. Why are people from different parts of the world using the same language when they discuss white genocide and supremacy? Why are these channels doing so well, and why do so many people listen to them? But in order to figure that out, I had to dive into white supremacy as an ideology and try to understand why something that seems to me so terrible can seem so attractive and entertaining to others. Well, to figure that out, I had to go across the pond and back to around the time when I started my YouTube channel in the early 2000s. In the early 80s, British fascist activist John Tyndall established a far right-wing political party called the British National Party. Tyndall had a long history of organizing neo-Nazi groups in the 50s and 60s and had made several attempts at gaining a seat in the House of Commons and the European Parliament to no success.
And nationalism will come to the fore, nationalism will come to victory in this country, and we will build again a country that is great, strong, proud, free, and white.
Your policy is to send them home.
To send them home where possible, or at least to resettle them, if there's not an immediate home available, to resettle them somewhere in the world.
You see, to so many immigrants, this is home.
Well, it may be, but that is not what is regarded by the majority of the population.
You talk of compensation, you see, but what happens when money fails to persuade the family to go
well, we have made it perfectly clear that this is going to be something obligatory. It has to be.
Most of the BNP's actions were street rallies and marches that promoted the idea that only white people should have access to British citizenship, and warning of the impending white genocide where the white race would eventually be outbred and effectively replaced by immigrants of color.
Tyndall and the BNP have launched a drive for new recruits to the cause. A prime target is young white working class men. They look for them around Scotland's football grounds.
The propaganda of movements like the BNP is very seductive indeed. You go up to some kid on a football terrace who's got no job, or perhaps the government had been kind enough to put him on some scheme where he learns to cut grass or something like that for 2 years. The BNP offering instant solutions. You see, a typical approach is, any of your family ever been in the army, mate? To which the youngster is likely to reply, yes, my father and my grandfather. Yes, and he fought for this country, for you. And the government have given it away to a load of Asians, Wogs, Chinese, God knows what. Your father fought for it for you. It's been stolen from you by traitors. Have you got the bottle? Have you got the guts to fight for it back? It's your country. Now you see, an approach like that has everything that a boy in that position needs.
The Ku Klux Klan, the League of St Andrew, European neo-Nazis, the British National Party. These small and disparate groups on the extreme right have one common connection, a hatred of the Jewish people.
We hope to convince the British people that the Holocaust is a lie, and that this lie of the Holocaust has generated enormous race hate for the German people and for any right-wing nationalists like ourselves. The Holocaust has definitely been overthrown by the works of the revisionist historians. There is absolutely no doubt about it.
Remove the Jew, you remove the problem. Pure, unadulterated Nazism. Pure and unadulterated. They are Nazis, and in private, John Tyndall has admitted as much to me.
The BNP was a blatantly neo-Nazi group, complete with Hitler references, so it would be an understatement to say that they had a branding issue. That all changed when Nick Griffin took Tyndall's place in 1999. Walking into a political party that had failed several times to secure seats in Parliament, Griffin was a breath of fresh air with new ideas. He wanted to modernize the movement and make it more digestible to the British public. He started to rebrand the BNP's message to focus on immigration, the incompatibility of certain racial groups with white people, and the dangers of Islam.
Whether it's called immigration, asylum, or managed migration, it's now a third world flood, which is wrecking this country.
After the BNP's neo-Nazi reputation had sullied their image, Griffin would stress that they were not a racist movement, but were simply a movement responding to anti-white racism. He focused on white working class people who were unsatisfied with the Labour Party and felt that immigrants were taking their jobs. Regularly, the BNP carried out community service in mostly white working class areas while wearing the BNP's logo. This slowly but surely started to change the public perception of the BNP.
The BNP obviously polls 16% of the vote in Barnsley. What do you think about that?
Fine, actually.
Do you think it's a good thing that the BNP have got a representative in Europe?
Yes.
I voted for BNP.
Did you? Could you tell me why?
Just fed up with everything.
Because the BNP scored very highly. They scored 16% in Barnsley. What do you think's behind that?
People are just fed up with the same old same, I think, so try something else.
Under Griffin's leadership, the BNP gained 2 seats in Parliament, with 1 going to himself. And by the time he was ousted from the BNP in 2009, they had won over 50 seats in local government. White nationalism wasn't restrained to Britain, and white nationalists around the world started to see Griffin as a political genius. He had taken white supremacy and made it so digestible and positioned it as so reasonable that it started to gain traction. In the April of the year 2000, he met with a group of white nationalists from Texas. At this meeting, he stressed his methods of selling white nationalism.
There's a difference between selling out your ideas and selling your ideas. And the British National Party isn't about selling out its ideas, which are your ideas too, but we are determined now to sell them. And that means basically to use these saleable words, as I say, freedom, security, identity, democracy. Nobody can criticise them. Nobody can come at you and attack you on those ideas. They are saleable. Perhaps one day, once by being rather more subtle, we've got ourselves in a position where we control the British broadcasting media, then perhaps one day the British people might change their mind and say, yes, every last one must go. Perhaps they will one day. But if you hold that out as your sole aim to start with, you're going to get absolutely nowhere. So, instead of talking about racial purity, we talk about identity.
The ultimate goal? An all-white ethno-state. How do they get there? By putting a more presentable face onto white nationalism and softening their message. Sitting right next to him during this talk was former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke. It's no shock that methods that worked in the UK would also be translated to the United States. On October 27, 2016, Mother Jones published an article titled "Meet the Dapper White Nationalist Riding the Trump Wave." The article profiled Richard Spencer, who created the term alt-right, a movement about white identity. The article makes several references to Spencer's usage of memes such as Pepe the Frog as useful tools in spreading his white nationalist message. The article also gives you a look into what white nationalist movements look like today. Spencer believes in an idyllic future where the main criteria for citizenship would be whiteness. Whiteness is loosely defined by him, but it would for sure exclude most Hispanics, blacks, Asians, Muslims, and Jewish people.
Why do Jews need a safe space? Do you want a safe space?
Do I want a white ethno-state? A state I can't live in? No.
Why would you be against that?
Sorry?
Why would you be against it?
Well, let me see. There was slavery. That was a kind of form of ethno-state.
There was
There was apartheid. And that didn't work out so well.
It didn't work out well for us, no.
It didn't work out well for anybody. It was a very, very bad idea. And
Africans have benefited from their experience with white supremacy.
He's hopeful that non-white people will agree to return to the land of their ancestors as, in his view, that would be the best for everyone. This interview was conducted before the election. But Richard Spencer was incredibly excited at the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president.
Donald Trump came along, and I feel like my movement and my ideology, we can be a kind of vanguard for a presidential candidate, that his arrow is pointing in our direction.
In fact, he argued that if Trump did win, it would be in part because of the alt-right's effective usage of memes.
The idea that Hitler has a monopoly on identity for white people is just simply ridiculous.
A month later, after Trump won the presidency, while at a conference in Washington, a video was taken of him screaming,
"Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!"
to an audience of men doing a Nazi salute. After that, he did a series of interviews for various news outlets discussing how a Trump win is a win for the alt-right and a win for white nationalism at large. And many of them complimented the way that he dressed.
Are these shoes a little too casual?
I don't think so. When most of us think of a white supremacist, we think about an obnoxious skinhead or a hooded KKK member burning a cross on our front yards. But Richard Spencer dresses like a church boy. He's well-spoken, he's charismatic, and to some people, he's good-looking. Spencer was solidified as a figure worth speaking to with ideas that were worthy of being spread. To me, this confused me because despite his church boy looks, his rhetoric is inherently dehumanizing to myself and other people of color. Spencer dreams of a future where people of color just pick up and go back to lands that are completely foreign to them so that he can secure a white ethno-state in America. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that this is unlikely to happen, and if it does, it's unlikely to happen without violence. To me, his ideas are bad and his goals are hurtful, but one of our founding principles in this country is our right to freedom of speech. Spencer's existence started a debate about whether or not we should give people like him a platform, especially because at the time the media was so fixated on him. In the August of 2017, a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee was going to be torn down in Charlottesville, Virginia. Upon receiving this news, Jason Kessler, a white supremacist activist and member of the alt-right, organized the Unite the Right rally after a year of protesting the statue's removal. Richard Spencer was a featured speaker. This rally would be the alt-right's first big event. The movement had mostly functioned online, so a lot of people could easily dismiss it as a movement for basement-dwelling white men who were angry at the world. Knowing this, the Daily Stormer, an incredibly popular blog among white supremacists, published a post all but begging the attendees to look presentable, hip, sexy, and dangerous. In the blog post, Andrew Anglin advises the men attending the event to not wear anything that could possibly resemble the uniform of previous white nationalist movements. While the blog was flanked with examples of how well-dressed Nazis were, he stressed that Nazi paraphernalia had, as he said, too much baggage. It even tells them to go to the gym and to wear fitted pants and t-shirts, not skinny jeans or belly shirts because that would be too feminine and we don't want that. They were, as they have in the past, trying to rebrand what white supremacy looks like, and even heavily advised that the movement should have a new uniform. At the rally, most of them wore beige khakis and polos that were fitted for the most part.
We're honoring the founding fathers who were white. We're honoring all of the great white men who are being smeared and defamed and torn down.
The interesting thing about this rally was that while they tried to hide their racism under the guise of free speech in their uniforms, they didn't really do a great job. They couldn't really hide the violence and vitriol behind what they believed in. Through the crowd, you heard, "You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us!" And a variation of that phrase, "Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!" Obviously referring to the concept of white genocide, where white countries are outbred and replaced by those who they deem as non-white. One people, one nation, and immigration! A white supremacist rammed his car into a crowd of protesters, killing a woman named Heather Heyer and injuring several other people. Jason Kessler's initial response to an audience during a news conference about the incident was,
"I would like to condemn any of the violence that happened yesterday. I disavow anything that led to folks getting hurt."
But a few days later on Twitter, he stated that Heather Heyer was a fat, disgusting communist who deserved to die because communists have killed over 94 million people and her death was just payback. He would delete the tweet the next morning and blame it on Ambien, Xanax, and alcohol. Ultimately, the Unite the Right rally did not make white nationalists look good, and Richard Spencer and other white supremacists distanced themselves from Kessler. When Kessler was organizing the 2018 Unite the Right rally, he distanced himself from Spencer because, to him, the alt-right had become synonymous with neo-Nazism, and that isn't who he says he is.
When I first met Spencer, he made my skin crawl. He was just a creepy individual. Everything that he said was stilted, like he was not being completely forthcoming about what he was saying, right? He had a poster of Adolf Hitler on his wall. At the time, I was thinking all this neo-Nazi stuff that was popping up on 4chan was more ironic, more for shock humor. Later on, I would come to find out that that is not the case, and that's part of why we had so many problems at Unite the Right, because the neo-Nazi contingent was not a bug, it was a feature, and that's directly due to the influence of people like Spencer, who I think are taking legitimate populist anger by white people about the discrimination and replacement policies against them right now, and he's diverting it into this neo-Nazi garbage that every white person in the country is going to turn against.
And is your message for today that white supremacy should be the main message here?
No, of course not. I'm not a white supremacist. No, it's that white people should have the same treatment as any other groups. We should be able to stand up for ourselves. We're becoming a minority in the United States and Europe by 2050. I think there's a lot of anti-white discrimination in this country that is not being faced, and people have to walk on eggshells because other groups have organizations like the NAACP or the ADL that will stand up for black people or Jewish people if they are being harassed because of their race, but white people don't have that, and because of that, I feel like there's unequal treatment.
Similarly, Richard Spencer denies that he is a white supremacist, but instead calls himself an identitarian, with race being the foundation of his identity.
Torchlight March, the Nazis were the only ones who ever did that.
I'm talking about you screaming Nazi slogans in Charlottesville.
First off, I don't go around screaming slogans at anything. And the slogan is actually, you will not replace us.
Right.
And
I also heard Jews will not replace us.
You might have heard that. Were you there?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. Sure. Some people shouted that. So what?
And see, these sorts of semantics are part of the rebranding of white supremacy. Remember, Nick Griffin reframed the BNP's historically neo-Nazi platform as not racist, but simply critical of immigration and concern for the state of white people. This pivot is important in selling the message that their concerns are valid. In the same way that wearing a Nazi uniform would be too obvious, saying outright that they want an all-white ethno-state would seem too racist. And most people, at least in theory, accept that racism is a bad thing, and they wouldn't want to co-sign it. But they might be open to hearing story after story of how certain non-white immigrant groups are dangerous and should be prevented from coming into the country. Kessler and Spencer may disagree with each other and identify themselves differently, but they both still dream of a society without people of color. They still believe that non-white people immigrating into America will lead to white genocide. They still believe that immigrants, especially when they're Muslim, are incompatible with white people and shouldn't share space. The Unite the Right rally did a great job at demonstrating how white nationalists want to be seen and how they truly feel. They carefully tried to curate a presentable version of their message, and it didn't work. Several different white supremacist groups with different ideologies but largely the same goals came together with different approaches. This also shows that their ideologies are intertwined, whether they're a proud neo-Nazi or church boys concerned about the future of the white race. Remember David Duke, the former KKK leader and American politician who was sitting next to Nick Griffin while he spoke about the long-term goals of the rebranding of white nationalism? Well, he was also at the rally, and he had this to say about it.
What does today represent to you? And the camera's right here. What does today represent to you?
This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
Remember that one of Griffin's long-term goals was getting white nationalism to the point where it was legitimized by the government, and slowly but surely, the goals of white nationalism can be reached. And that's the thing. People can debate about whether or not Trump is a racist, but either way, the racists seem to think that he's on their side.
Some of the things that he's saying are issues that we've been tackling for years now. When we talk about globalism, we talk about America first, these sort of things, bringing back American jobs. These are things that he's hitting on. So it's put a lot of our nationalism sort of becoming mainstream.
And white nationalists at large believe that even if they have slight disagreements with Trump, ultimately, he's working towards their goals. And this has caused some people to become emboldened, especially as Trump minimizes their impact and refuses to alienate them. Back to PewDiePie. When he heard that his name was mentioned in a terrorist attack, he quickly moved to disavow the terrorist and his actions. But people began to point out that PewDiePie had previously done things that many people would consider were dog whistles to white supremacists. And they also pointed out that he was currently following several people that many consider to be the gateways to white nationalism. Kid O'Connell took a screenshot of those people and posted it with the caption, "Here are some of the Nazi scum PewDiePie was following until recently. Why is he following them? Because PewDiePie is a Nazi." I don't want to dismiss O'Connell's point here that many of the people on that list flirt with white nationalism, and some of them I'd say Nazism. However, I think that dismissing them all as Nazis, and PewDiePie by extension as one, overlooks the reason why people often follow this particular group of people. I know that it sounds like splitting hairs, but I think part of understanding how white nationalism has been rebranded is understanding how white nationalists target people who don't yet hold white nationalist views. As I pointed out earlier, the BNP focused most of their energy towards recruiting men who were young, working class, and felt as though there was currently no position for them in society. And this tactic started long before the internet would become a haven for young men who felt exactly that way. Young men in that position frequently desire some sort of guidance, and when you're that lonely, it's sometimes easier to find that online. YouTube user Faraday Speaks recently published a video discussing how he went from being a fairly progressive person to falling down the alt-right rabbit hole through some of the people that PewDiePie used to follow.
I fell down the alt-right rabbit hole. One thing that was always true for me throughout high school and when I was younger was I was always much a very liberal person. Fast forward to my graduation and I go to college. I come from a poor rural background, and I thought that I was going to get myself out of this situation, get an engineering degree, go, get into environmentalism, maybe solar panels or something, and I was going to change the world and accomplish all my dreams and get away from all these, it's funny looking back, conservative type of society that I felt was too regimented and wanted to control me. But when I went to college, that's not what happened. I got depressed, and there weren't a lot of people like me there. And I got in with the wrong crowds, and I got depressed, I got lost, I was looking for the wrong kinds of validation, and I ended up flunking out. I became very depressed upon returning home. My friends had all left, I was alone, I didn't have a good relationship with my family. I would stay in my room and I would just surf the web all day. And I went back to YouTube, something that was comforting for me when I was in high school, going through, these types of experiences, this type of frustration. And what I was looking for was I was looking for a way to fix myself. Eventually, as I was looking through all these videos, this little video, this YouTuber popped up in my sidebar. It was Stefan Molyneux. Stefan resonated with me because Stefan had shared the same experiences that I had shared. Stefan, he had a traumatic childhood. He had issues with his mother. He had issues with the rest of his family. He had issues with the society around him. He was angry with the society around him that it never stepped in and did anything to help him. And these were all things that I felt. It rang so true to me. And then he started talking about how he was able to get out of it. He blamed a lot of his situation on liberalism. He was charming and intelligent, and he had a different message with it, with content that had a different format that I was used to. And I wanted so hard to believe that this person who was like me was able to fix themselves. In my mind, I set him up as an authority figure. As I watched more of his content, for the first couple months, it was just self-help stuff. But then I started to notice that he had all these other videos about politics and social commentary, and you know, he would talk about like the relationships between men and women, and he would talk about, you know, the state. And behind it, he always had the veneer of, like, he was a Renaissance man, calls himself a philosopher that is trying bringing the objective truth to the world. And his philosophy was called objectivism. And I was young and naive. When he would feed me this information about history and about, you know, what he saw as scientific facts and his theories and his social commentaries, because of the benefits that I'd gotten from him and the pain that he had relieved from me, I assumed he was honest. Slowly over time, I started to adapt a lot of those ideas that he had about society and about politics. On top of that, he had guests on his show. And so when he would bring a guest on, they would have their own little pet issue that they would want to talk about. Islam, feminism, all types of things. I thought, well, Steph's vetted these people, and he talks so positively with them in the video, and he agrees with them, and so I would set them up as an authority figure. And then I would go to their YouTube channel, and I would start consuming their content. Mind you, Steph's ideas, this was 2014. When I found him, his ideas were a lot more mild. And so I got introduced to people like Crowder and Shapiro. And once I started listening to them, I started believing into a lot of the conservative principles. And then from there, I got introduced to people like Lauren Southern and Kevin McInnes, and then finally, by the end of it, I'm listening to Jared Taylor talk about racial differences, and it all had this sense that it was all connected, and they had clear out groups on who the enemy was and who was reliable. You know, the left, the liberals, the communists. You know, there was always this conspiracy at the gates that the left is trying to take us down. And it seems so plausible because the left does seem to have a domination on things like Hollywood and a lot of the culture. And so, these conservatives, they would play it up like they were victims, like their free speech was being taken and their values were being destroyed. And I bought into that rhetoric. I started out as a libertarian, mind you, when I watched Stefan's content. Before that, I was a liberal. But then, as I listened to Stefan, I picked up libertarian ideas. What would happen was I would get to a point where, I wanted the libertarianism because I wanted a free society. But then I realized that, well, we can't have a free society if there isn't social cohesion and there isn't a strong structure to bind us together. And so I slowly found myself turning into a conservative. I started out as a libertarian, and then because I thought that we needed social cohesion, I became a conservative. And then from there, I thought that the conservatives weren't going far enough. We called them cucks. And I started to believe that we needed strong borders, and we needed a national identity, and we needed to raise the birth rates. And to me, it wasn't necessarily white birth rates. I saw it more as like, we needed more intelligent people having children. As I started to learn more, as I listened to people like, Jared Taylor or, Molyneux started putting out a lot more race content, talking about race and IQ, talking about the bell curve. And they use this term called race realism. And the idea is that there's differences in the races depending on where they evolved in the world. They're immutable. They're tied to biology. I bought into that. And because of that, I started to see society as a product of this, the combination between culture and race being so important because it's tied to IQ. I bought more and more into it. I went further down the funnel. And at the point where I landed, I wouldn't call it full alt-right. And I didn't go that far, but I did entertain ideas, and especially during the Trump era, about a strong leader and a unified party. And, we had to expel the invaders, which I saw as like Muslims and Marxists. And we had to expel the traitors, which, once again, were like the communists and anybody that was promoting degeneracy within our culture. I just kept falling deeper and deeper into this. And it appealed to me because it made me feel a sense of belonging. It made me feel a sense of progressing forward, both progressing forward and preserving what we have.
There are many dangers in the way that white nationalism has been rebranded, but one of the biggest ones is that it doesn't seem like white nationalism. It's very rarely presented to you as someone trying to sell you a luxury condo on the ethno-state. You have to be convinced, and it's hard to convince someone who is raised in a diverse society that diversity is the reason for all of their problems. Another danger is that it's been rebranded in a way where it can be denied. Remember, Nick Griffin said,
"There's a difference between selling out your ideas and selling your ideas. And the British National Party isn't about selling out its ideas, which are your ideas too, but we are determined now to sell them. And that means basically to use these saleable words, as I say, freedom, security, identity, democracy. Nobody can criticise them. Nobody can come at you and attack you on those ideas. They are saleable. Perhaps one day, once by being rather more subtle, we've got ourselves in a position where we control the British broadcasting media, then perhaps one day the British people might change their mind and say, yes, every last one must go."
It's strategic. It's intentional. Plausible deniability is part of why these ideas can grow and spread, and they know this. Most of the people on that list don't produce content that is blatantly white nationalist, but they often create content that feeds into its ideologies. And while they're all different and some of them even disagree with each other, they often work in Congress. Frequently, people are drawn in with things that are innocuous. Initially, young men may be drawn to Jordan Peterson because he seems like a father figure that gives sagely advice. However, as you follow him, you hear more and more about things like birth rates, immigration levels, and the proper role of women in society under a man. He'll collaborate and interact with people who flirt closer and closer to white nationalism, and people who may have been following him for sagely advice are now introduced to people with more severe ideologies. So while Jordan Peterson on his own may not believe in the alt-right as a movement as someone who is against identity politics even for white people, following him frequently leads you to following people with more blatantly white nationalist views, who also discuss birth rates, immigration, and the proper role of a woman in society. So these different speakers connect through similar criticisms, and while they may have slightly different ideas from each other, frequently their audience is the same, and that audience is also part of PewDiePie's audience. So what now? Is PewDiePie a Nazi? I don't think so. I do, however, believe that he's incredibly useful to those who want to spread white nationalism, and he's being courted by those who know that his platform is probably the most effective at doing this. Think about it. White nationalists have been fighting for decades to mainstream their ideology. In a world where everyone seems tethered to the internet, having the support of the most subscribed to person on YouTube means a lot, not only to those talking heads, but to PewDiePie's followers. While someone like Ben Shapiro isn't a white nationalist, he and Spencer have similar ideas about immigration and how Muslims are incompatible with American culture. PewDiePie has also mentioned Ben Shapiro several times, and Shapiro has even hosted a segment on his channel. From what I can tell, PewDiePie thinks Ben Shapiro is a meme and doesn't really take him seriously or anything he says seriously. However, maybe that's not how it's being seen by his audience. People who both support Shapiro and think that he's ridiculous and meme-worthy might see his existence on PewDiePie's channel as support. It has the benefit of not alienating people who support some of the more damaging things that he says, while also maintaining his audience who laughs at him. PewDiePie tries to be apolitical, so he doesn't criticize Shapiro. But while Shapiro may post something meme-worthy, he is at his core very political. While PewDiePie has said that he doesn't support hate or hate groups, he hasn't done it in a way that would actively alienate the white nationalists who follow him. Situations like this have always confused me because while sure, you can't really control your followers, you can make it clear that you disagree with their ideologies. You can make it clear that you don't want the support of people who hold certain beliefs. But doing that will potentially mean losing money. And I get that. Like I said, I didn't always want for this to be my job, but now it is. And whenever you make a bold stance, especially one that goes against the status quo, you often experience a huge loss. While I've tried to be apolitical, I've recognized that living, functioning, and succeeding as a Black transgender woman is incredibly political. My mere existence is the fodder for political discourse and debate. my experiences minimized in the ongoing conversations about whether or not I should have access to civil rights. I've made the decision to stand up for what's right, even though it often comes at a great loss. That's a decision I've made for what I believe is the greater good, but it's one many won't make. It's my content that got me invited to the YouTube headquarters in 2017, where I met with various teams and got the chance to sit down and ask the CEO of YouTube what she's doing about this intentional rebranding of white nationalism and how it had the capacity to radicalize people towards terrorism. And the answer I got was both expected and incredibly depressing.